Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'll be reading from where I stopped last time. But then he said to himself, before it strikes 7:15, I must be quite out of this bed without fail. Anyhow, by that time, someone will have come from the office to ask for me since it opens before 7. And he set himself to rocking his whole body at once in a regular rhythm, with the idea of swinging it out of the bed. If he tipped himself out in that way, he could keep his head from injury by lifting it at an acute angle when he fell. His back seemed to be hard and was not likely to suffer from a fall on the carpet. His biggest worry was the loud crash he would not be able to help making, which would probably cause anxiety, if not terror, behind all the doors. Still, he must take the risk. When he was already half out of the bed, the new method was more a game than an effort, for he needed only to hitch himself across by rocking to and fro. It struck him how simple it would be if he could get help. Two strong people, he thought of his father and the servant girl, would be amply sufficient. They would only have to thrust their arms under his convex back, lever him out of the bed, bend down with their burden, then be patient enough to let him turn himself right over onto the floor, where it was to be hoped his legs would then find their proper function. Well, ignoring the fact that the doors were all locked, ought he really to call for help? In spite of his misery, he cannot suppress a smile at the very idea of it. He had got so far that he could barely keep his equilibrium when he rocked himself strongly, and he would have to nerve himself very soon for the final decision, since in 5 minutes' time it would be 7:15. When the front doorbell rang, "That's someone from the office," he said to himself, and grew almost rigid, while his little legs only jigged about all the faster. For a moment, everything stayed quiet. "They're not going to open the door," said Gregor to himself, catching at some kind of irrational hope. But then, of course, the servant girl went as usual to the door with her heavy tread and opened it. Gregor needed only to hear the first good morning of the visitor to know immediately who it was. The chief clerk himself. What a fate to be condemned to work for a firm where the smallest omission at once gave rise to the gravest suspicion. Where all employees in a body nothing but scoundrels, was there not among them one single loyal, devoted man who, had he wasted only an hour or so of the firm's time in a morning, was so tormented by conscience as to be driven out of his mind and actually incapable of leaving his bed? Wouldn't it really have been sufficient to send an apprentice to inquire if any injury were necessary at all? Did the chief clerk himself have to come and thus indicate to the entire family, an innocent family, that this suspicious circumstance could be investigated by no one less versed in affairs than himself? And more through the agitation caused by these reflections than through any act of will, Gregor swung himself out of the bed with all his strength. There was a loud thump, but it was not really a crash. His fall was broken to some extent by the carpet. His back, too, was less stiff than he thought, and so there were merely a dull thud, not so very startling. Only he had not lifted his head carefully enough and had hit it. He turned it and rubbed it on the carpet in pain and irritation. "That was something falling down in there," said the chief clerk in the next room to the left. Gregor tried to suppose to himself that something like that had happened to him today might someday happen to the chief clerk. One really could not deny that it was possible. But as if in a brusque reply to this supposition, the chief clerk took a couple of firm steps in the next door room, and his patent leather boots creaked. In the right-hand room, his sister was whispering to inform him of the situation. "Gregor, the chief clerk's here." "I know," muttered Gregor to himself, but he didn't dare to make his voice loud enough for his sister to hear it. "Gregor," said his father now from the left-hand room, "the chief clerk has come and wants to know why you didn't catch the early train." "We don't know what to say to him. Besides, he wants to talk to you in person, so open the door, please. He'll be good enough to excuse the untidiness of your room." Good morning, Mr. Samsa. The chief clerk was calling amiably meanwhile. He's not well, said his mother to the visitor, while his father was still peeking through the door. He's not well, sir, believe me. What else would make him miss a train? The boy thinks about nothing but his work. It makes me almost cross the way he never goes out in the evenings. He's been here the last 8 days and has stayed at home every single evening. He just sits there quietly at the table reading a newspaper or looking through railway timetables. The only amusement he gets is doing fretwork. For instance, he spent 2 or 3 evenings cutting out a little picture frame. You'll be surprised to see how pretty it is. It's hanging in his room. You'll see it in a minute when Gregor opens the door. I must say, I'm glad you've come, sir. We should never have got him to unlock the door by ourselves. He's so obstinate, and I'm sure he's unwell, though he wouldn't have it to be this morning. I'm just coming, said Gregor slowly and carefully, not moving an inch for fear of losing one word of the conversation. I can't think of any other explanation, madame, said the chief clerk. I hope it's nothing serious, although on the other hand, I must say that we men of business, fortunately or unfortunately, very often simply have to ignore any slight indisposition since business must be attended to. Well, can the chief clerk come in now? Asked Gregor's father impatiently, again knocking on the door. No, said Gregor. In the left-hand room, a painful silence followed this refusal. In the right-hand room, his sister began to sob. Now, this is where I'll stop for today. Thank you guys so much.